Hello, and welcome to this month's meetup. We're here with an exceptional speaker this month. This year is Jane Landon. She is the CIO of the New York City Department of Finance, formerly the CIO at both Microsoft and Prudential. And she's going to give us an amazing presentation on So You Want to Become CIO? Be careful what you wish for.
Hi, everybody. Thank you. I hope you guys will allow me to have a little fun this evening. And I hope you'll excuse me for having the glasses down like this. This is what happens when you get old. I can't see the screen, and if I don't put them down here, I can't see you guys out in the audience. Just to set some context, I'm the CIO of the Department of Finance for the City of New York, and a lot of people, as soon as I say that, think that I run the general ledgers for the city, and that's not what the Department of Finance does. You may like me less after I tell you we're the revenue collectors. We're the people who handle the tax bills, the parking tickets. We bring in all the money, and so I'm responsible for all the systems that bring in about $22.5 billion into the City of New York. And I also run a shared service for the City of New York that takes care of all of the payments that come in. So if you make any payment in any part of the city, the payments are actually coming through the systems that I support, and specifically online, the systems that we've built out. So that's what I'm doing now. And so what I'd like to do, since we are here in New York, and you guys know New York City, but I thought I would have a little fun. I thought I'd start with, did you know? Did you know that New York City was the first capital and that Washington was sworn in New York City? Did you know that if we looked at it from a revenue collection, we would be the fourth largest revenue collector in the United States, falling right behind that small little thing called New York State. And if you took us out of New York State, they might be 25th on the list. So don't tell them that. But if you looked at us from a worldwide perspective, we would be the 14th largest country if you look at it from a revenue perspective. So it's kind of interesting. Here's my favorite. This is my absolute favorite. If you look at the buildings in New York, and you looked at all the copper that is in New York, now, if we could figure out how to mine the copper in the buildings in the city of New York, we would be the largest copper mine in the world. To be able to pull the copper. That's the plumbing. Someone's looking at me. That's all the plumbing that's in the buildings, running all the water up and down and in the streets and things. So that's it. We're 301 square miles. I actually think my slides are a little outdated. I think there are 13,001 as the cash cab company. You know, if you watch that show ever on television, it says he's the 13,001 taxi cab. Miles of roads and lots of miles of subway, unique. There were some brilliant minds in the early days who built the infrastructure out in New York City. And the last thing is, everybody here who's lived in New York or has come to New York as adults know that we have the best pizza in the world, and we order, because we actually created the first pizza in New York, a place called Lombardi's. And that's why it's so good, because we've been at it a long time. So that's the fun part. Here's the next fun part. Now I got to ask you guys. All you have to do is show or raise a hand. Any CIOs in the audience? Okay. I don't have to invite anybody to come up here and help me with this presentation. How about anybody who has a desire or wants to be a CIO in the audience? We got one, too. Okay. So what are the rest of you guys doing here? How about the idea of the CIO? You're not really sure, but it might appeal to you. Whoa. There's only 5 of you. This is going to be a really hard audience. Okay, now here's the really good question. I hope not the whole audience's hands come up. How many of you guys out there think that the CIO does nothing? Show of hands. You guys think that we do nothing? No? Okay.
Eat bonbons?
Yeah, eat bonbons. We do that too. Yeah. I get my nails done once a week too. How many of you think we have no sense of humor? Most of the CIOs that you know have no sense of humor. You guys are shy. You know, I bet there's someone who, he's biting his nails back there. He doesn't want to put his hands up. Okay, so I just thought, for those of you who think that we don't do anything, or for those of you who are wannabe CIOs, I hope you love meetings. That's a snapshot of 1 month of my calendar. And you can't see everything because some of them will actually run down because there's so many back-to-back, half an hour, half an hour, half an hour. I get in about 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning just so I can get my real work done, and I'm usually in the office after everybody leaves so I can finish up for the end of the day, because the rest of the day, as you can see, I'm in meetings, and I was lucky we actually had a holiday. That's why the corner looks, kind of empty up there on Monday. So it's not that we don't do anything, but if you don't love meetings, so I'll share with you what does a day in the life look like, for a CIO. What are the things that we do? What are we responsible for? One is, we're expected to develop a vision for the organization that aligns with the business, because you've got to get support from the business and what their goals and objectives are, and then be able to communicate it down into the organization. You're responsible for managing all the commitments that we make to the business, So I, at any given time, probably have about 50 or 60 major projects going on, ranging from $100,000 of investment up to $40 million of investment in my organization. And the buck stops here, because I can't, that's as far as it goes. So everybody else in the organization will have issues, and so kind of driving those things and making sure that the staff is appropriately setting expectations. And I love to tell my staff, just don't tell me the day after it's too late. I can't help you with that. But if you tell me early, I promise you there's no punishment for something like that, because I am really good at resetting expectations if we have enough time. So if we have a delay or there's an issue or there's something that comes along. And that's part of the role, which is, how do you actually, protect your organization from some of what I call the dancing elephants above, who make changes. They'll change strategy, they're not sure, they think that what we do is really easy. They're like, could you just add 5 more things on the screen? Well, that's like saying, could we move the bathroom down the hall? There's no plumbing down there. And so it's not that we actually know how difficult what we're requested on a given basis. But setting expectations is important, and then actually knowing to raise the flag way before, when you can see the fact that you're in trouble, and communicating that back to the business, you can usually get it back on track, and they don't even know that you slipped. We all slip. We all make mistakes. None of us are that great of predictors of every step and every complication in projects. A major part of my role, especially in the city, is getting the funding needed to actually allow people to do great things. And so I'm out there with a tin cup a lot of times, trying to get the fair share for the organization to drive, along with the business. But a lot of it kind of is selling concepts that are difficult for the business to even understand why they need them. A lot of the things that we do, you need to lay some foundations. It's not all the pretty icing on the top of the cake. You've got to have the cake underneath if you're going to bake a cake, right? So selling some of those concepts, I spend a lot of time at doing that in a way that the business can understand and will stand behind me and align with me and help me get the funding that we need to get projects done. I spend a lot of time removing barriers that get in the way. A lot of times it's just the politics. It's really easy to say no when you work in an environment that you have to rely on others to get a piece of work done. And so I tend to think I'm usually the last stop, but very often I spend probably 10% of my day in conversations, removing barriers, or getting an organization that may or may not want to work, but is part of the critical path in any given piece of work that we do. You mix all the high-level stuff up with getting funding and setting vision and all those good things, and then the CIO as the head of technology in an organization where most of the business people don't know that much about technology, still expect that I can dive down to the deepest levels and explain a little bit. And I can tell you, I get from my commissioner calls, Jane, I just got a PDF file and it's sideways. Can we? What do I need to do to stand it up straight? So it happens, right? So I get calls like that, and that's it's like that's what we have a help desk for, and that's why I have people who can answer the phone and answer those kind of questions. But But there is an expectation there, because you came up the technology ranks, and there's an expectation that you can do those things. You know, the issue escalation, and it's like I like to say, is, you know, the city never sleeps, nor does the CIO. It's a 7 by 24 job. And when issues happen, the escalation change, and I very often am out of bed in the middle of the night because something is down. Trying to work with the team and get people together. It's even probably more challenging with the city. I have a very, very small crew, but I have systems that run 7 by 24. But I have a very small crew that is in 7 by 24, and actually getting the resources you need when you do have a real issue is an issue that I'm very well versed at these days. Mentoring, inspiring, and working with my direct reports, with my people, with making sure that they're happy, they're productive, they're growing, they're getting opportunities, that I've looked at my organization and mentoring 2 or 3 people to be my takeout. That's important, otherwise I have to stay here forever, or you know, I can't go someplace else.
What do you mean by takeout? Sorry.
Takeout, my personal takeout, like on my direct report. So who in my direct report should I be grooming? How do I set situations up for them so that they get the opportunity to grow? How do I put them in a position to be in meetings and get the exposure that they need? How do I just have conversations where they're having trouble and actually dealing with some situation within an organization or within the peer organizations or business partners that they support, and mentoring them in that way? Is a big piece of my time, and then, you know, the last thing, it's the least fun thing, is making all the hard decisions, and all the hard decisions these days are hard decisions. They're really hard decisions. You know, what do you do when there's not enough money and you got to cut the budget? What do you do, and where do we look, and how do we make those decisions, and what projects should we be stopping? Because to everybody who's working a project, if you have the right kind of project teams and you built them, they're passionate, they're happy about it, it's not a happy thing to be able to have to come to a group and say, we're taking that project down, we're stopping that project, because we have to, because we don't have the money, and we can't afford to go there. And the worst thing is when you have to deal with people issues, and that's, you know, happened in New York, and that's a difficult issue to deal with. And so those are what I call the hard decisions. And they take part of my time, even in the city. It's a big piece of time. The city is impacted. We used to be $24 billion, right? And that's a big piece of change to lose that. So, you know, I deal with some of the same issues. We deal with the fallout of what happened in the financial services, and we actually probably will have a recovery that trails everyone else's recovery by about a year, because the way that revenue is collected is about a year behind when you think of business taxes and you think of tax flows coming in. So as the rest of the economy recovers, the city will still be 1 year before they actually see the recovery coming through. The last thing that I think, you know, really I spend, you know, quite a bit of time in one-on-one with my staff, in breakfast with Jane to make sure that I'm communicating to all levels of the organization, with meetings at the cabinet level and with the senior leadership around the organization, so I make sure that I'm on the pulse of what is happening in the business, so if we have to shift and change direction, that's going on. And lastly is, I can't say that all CIOs, I see at least 3 or 4 vendors every single week. And I see them because I recognize that I'm not the smartest person in the world, and there are a lot of smart vendors out there that have something that, you know, if every meeting I meet with somebody and I get one great thought or one new technology idea, it is worth the hour that I spend for my organization. And I very often bring people in because I want people to be progressively looking. There's one thing I've learned in my way long career in technology is just when you think you know it all changes on you. And the skill is not the art. The art is the skill of learning and lifelong learning. If you want to be a successful technologist or you want to be a successful leader in technology, whatever space it is. With all of that said, because it doesn't sound like a really good job, and that's what I said about, like, do you really want to do this? this role. It's not glamorous. It's my passion. I love it. I love every minute of it. I love every second of mentoring, growing, meeting goals, finding solutions, seeing them come about. And those are all the wonderful things about being a CIO. I can think of and how serious I am about the technology people. I have groomed out of people who have worked for me in the past, produced at least 8 who are now CIOs in their own rights in large organizations. So it's like being a proud parent. I have no children, so I look at my staff that way. And it's a great feeling. When I hire people, I like to think every person I hire could one day be my boss, and I would be proud to work for them. So those are some of the great things, and then the idea that just when you think you know it all changes on you. I'm a love to learn. And I also like big challenges, and there's the portion of that there's a whole bunch of big challenges in the role. So let me share with you a little bit about my career story, because it's kind of fun. I've had more than one. I've been a CIO. This will go back to those fun questions for you. I've been a CIO in 4 different organizations, because as CIOs, we can't keep a job. But I started my career way back. Anybody who is under 45 will not know what I'm talking about. When I went to college, I have a business degree. I did take programming, and I did that on punch card machines, right? And the editors were so good. You know what you got? The next morning you got a big printout, and it had a star next to the line that was an error. Well, the only reason I'm successful is because Microsoft Word came along. I can't spell. I'm not a great writer. I had great logic. I'm great at math. But back in those days, without the editors of today, I was a lousy programmer. And so when I came out of college with a business degree, I didn't know what I wanted to do. And my exposures were, like I said, punch card devices and driving that side. And my first interview was with a company called Lanier. Any of you who are under 45 will not remember that company. They're no longer in business. But they were probably one of the first word processing companies. And they had a screen that was like this, like paper, like it looked like paper, and you would type onto the paper. And when I saw that, I was like, oh my God, I want to do this, right? I want to be with a technology company, because the technology in college I was exposed to was quite different. And so every interview was with technology companies because I didn't get that job. They didn't hire me, but I knew that's what I wanted to do. And so I interviewed with only technology companies, wanted to be involved with a technology company, and went to work for Burroughs Corporation, another company that is now part, a merger happened, and it's Unisys Corporation today. But I went to work for them there, and this way back in the day, they sent you up to like their own little internal college, and you kind of learn technology there. And then I supported, I did quite a few roles for that corporation, but I supported, implementations and learned the technology kind of out in customer site. From there I went to Wang Laboratories, and one day I decided I didn't want to be on the vendor side anymore. And I was working with Chase Manhattan Bank. I was an image processing specialist at the point in time in the late 80s, when people didn't know how to spell imaging or re-engineering or that kind of thing. And that's what I did. When I finally got up a little nerve, because I thought, I want to hop to the other side of the fence, and I would like to actually be on the financial services side, or in a technology role where I was really part of an organization, not this continuing moving from customer to customer to customer. And I got the nerve to call up the person who handled all emerging technologies for Chase Manhattan Bank, and I said, Gene, because I knew it, could you help me redo my resume? I would like to actually move to the other side of the fence. And he said, thank God you called. Because the contract with Wang Laboratories said I could reach out to them, but they could not reach out to me, and they were trying to figure out for 6 months how to hire me. And so I was really lucky, and I started the next Monday as Vice President of Emerging Technologies at Chase. And that's kind of how I got to the other side of the fence. And so I did that role, which was a great role, gave me great exposure to the bank for about 2 years. And I went to the line role and got my first management role in technology. wasn't a CIO at Chase. I went off to Bankers Trust and became a CIO there, or their equivalent. I was a managing director of all their global corporate systems worldwide. There I did do the general ledger. And it was an interesting thing. I did that because every headhunter was telling me, look, you've done all these great new technologies, you've done the imaging thing, you've done the massively parallel thing, you've done data warehouse thing, you've made a career out of taking down mainframes, but you can't be a CIO unless you go manage a mainframe group, because they were not going to hire you if you don't have that experience. And so I went to Bankers Trust to get that experience, and I did that for 2.5 years. But it was a role that was part of my career plan. I can tell you when I was at Chase, it probably took me about 6 months on that side of the fence to recognize I wanted to be a CIO. And so I spent a lot of time talking to CIOs, so how did you get there, what do you have to do, speaking to headhunters, what do people expect, and I actually developed a 10-year plan. And the plan worked. I got there in 9 into the role. So I had a good plan. I actually got there ahead of time. And some of it was, just by pure luck. But the others was by having a plan, and part of it was like this: I'm going to go do 2 years at Bankers Trust and get the experience in the mainframe, because nobody thinks that I can be a CIO if I don't get the experience in mainframe. And I'm going to time box that for 2 years, because that's not what I want to do for my career. I actually like the real creative side of putting in technology that's new and kind of on the edge. Then I moved to Prudential, and I did some really interesting work there. And was a CIO for their institutional division. And then my ego. So this is what about, be careful what you ask for. So for the 5 people who think they really want to be a CIO, make sure that you really understand what that means, and it's not just your ego speaking. I thought I wanted to be a CEO while I was at Prudential. I thought I was ready for this next big thing in my career. And so I went off to Microsoft to run a business, and I was the general manager for worldwide .NET market development for Microsoft for 2.5 years. I met the goals that the company gave me. What I did was reported in their quarterly reports, and I missed being a CIO every single day that I was in that role. Every day. It took me over a year to understand Microsoft's total strategy, their business strategy, which in most companies that I've worked with took me about 2 months to get to, because when you're in a technology role and you're in a CIO position, almost everything touches you. So the strategy becomes very apparent very fast, because you're seeing it in action by the things that you're helping and enabling them to do. When you run a business within inside a big corporation, you're responsible and you're so focused in just that business, you don't get the big picture of what the real strategy is. And so I missed that every single day. And after 2.5 years and meeting the goals, I asked Microsoft to help me find something different to do in the organization, and I took a CIO role there for a year. And mostly, on the selfish side, I have to say, on the selfish side, it was repositioning. My husband lived in New York. I was living in Redmond, Washington. This was not an easy life for 3.5 years. So I wanted to come home to the state of New York. I wanted to see my husband on a regular basis and not be the frequent flyer that I was. And so I wanted to reposition my resume, because people were confused at that point. Well, you ran a business, why not? And I really didn't want to do that when I wanted to be a CIO. So I came back to New York. I actually resigned Microsoft on December 1st and came back on the 19th after I did a good transition. I didn't want to burn my bridges. I do business with them. But somebody tapped me and said, could you help us in the city of New York? First I said no. And then I said, this could be really an opportunity for me to give back. This could be something that I could actually really do at this point in my career and really have some fun. Because I love a good challenge. That's kind of part of my DNA. And I knew that it would be a big challenge. It's actually one of the most fun things that I've done, with all of the issues that you have to deal with. It's one of the most fun jobs I've had and the most rewarding jobs that I've had in my entire career. Not from a great technology side, but from the ability to take an organization. I stepped off the plane from Microsoft and walked into an environment where inside, not what you see on our website, but inside what's really behind the man in the curtain, don't pull the curtain behind, was a sea of 3270 green screens running under Microsoft Windows framework. I hadn't seen a green screen in 15 years. I had spent my career taking them down, right? And so, the idea of moving and propelling the organization 15 years in 3 to 5 is incredibly fun. And so I'm having an opportunity. I'm halfway through at this point, living through it right now, and it's a lot of fun. My advice to anybody, so you guys are here, you obviously have some passion about this, you're part of this group, you're passionate about the technology side here, is follow your passion. I can tell you I've had a very successful career. I could retire tomorrow. Life has been good to me. I never thought about the dollars, ever, in any career that I made. It was about filling something and getting to a goal. And if you do things that you're passionate about, the money usually follows right behind you. So, that's something. Know what you're good at, especially if you're going to manage people. The last thing you want to have is a bunch of direct reports who are all exactly like you, because we all have some weaknesses, and if they're all exactly like you, they probably have some of the similar weaknesses. And the best is to have a diverse group from a skills level that can actually take care of whatever your weaknesses are. So more important than knowing what your strengths are, know what your weaknesses are, and fill those people around you to make sure that that balances, because if you're really a good manager and you love the people who work for you, you recognize that I really do nothing. It's everybody who works for me who does everything. It's been many years since I've had to roll up my sleeves and do the work of my organization. And so having the right kind of people is really important in the organization. So recognize that your team makes you successful. It's not you making success. Develop a career plan. So I've known and I've worked with a lot of people in this space, which is if there are things that you need to fill out in whatever the path that you take for your career, whether you take this one or not, if you have a goal and you know that's where you want to be. Time box things, because sometimes people get stuck at an organization, or they happen to get a manager and they're not getting the opportunity, or they're not getting the learning that they need, and they think if they stay there for 5 years, 10 years, that will eventually happen, and it doesn't. And it's your career. It's not the company you work for. It's your career. So remember that it's your career. So have a time box of some things that if you expect to get something fulfilled in a time window, put a time window and a time box around that. Develop great networking skills. It's more important, and all kinds of networking, right? Networking. I love all the good things that are happening today. But networking is a skill that you really need to have to make sure that you get the opportunities, right? So if you get a time box thing and you're not getting what you want, you have the opportunity to move someplace else where you might get those skills. And then befriend. Can I tell a funny story? So in the early 90s, before data warehousing was even a word that existed, I ran an info center. I can tell you that I'm assured that I ran at Chase Manhattan Bank the largest Sybase database ever produced in the world. And it was on a beta product, really was alpha. We built jointly with AT&T, NCR, and Sybase in 1992. So it was the first kind of like non-Teradata. That was a proprietary version. It was a Unix version running on Intel platform in 92 to run a data warehouse and put up a relational model and do this, right? So I had this thing called a mainframe info center. It was 1-800-JANE, give me the report. They'd call up and say, I want you to do this report, and then I had some great, brilliant technologists who would show me, well, look at this thing. It runs for 30 days, and it produces these answers. Well, how do I look at those answers? Well, you have to have the book. You have to flip here, because it was like, it was a matrix of 3,400 data elements across 12,000 segments, so that you could get the answers. It was an answer base he was creating. And I remember seeing the demo. I said, you're brilliant. I can't believe you actually produced this. But no one's going to use this. They can't figure it out. And so we went down this journey, and we actually did. I mean, so we put up this Sybase database. It was alpha code. I think we were the only successful customer who had it up. It came down 8 or 10 times a day, but it could give you the answer in 15 minutes, and it was okay, because when we ran a big report on the mainframe, it would take a week and a half. Half the time you deliver the report, the business would forget why they asked you the question, right? And so it didn't matter that it came down that many times, and so it's kind of that was the precursor to some of the technology that's out there in the clusters and the massively parallel that we're using today. But it was fun. And those are the kinds of things, those are the kind of risks. On the business side of that, what I knew, here's the sell. It cost us $24 million a year on the mainframe. Please give me $23 million to actually put this thing up. I'm going to give you all the tools out there. We trained the entire community to use tools so they could do their own reports. And it cost us $6 million a year on the new platform. And it was out there. So it was a fun time, but probably a spot and an interest to kind of you guys. So I kind of blazed a few trails, but I can guarantee you we had the largest Sybase database in the world because it was just carved up into little pieces at the time. Maybe today. I don't know if they actually do database anymore. Thanks, guys. But here's the funny thing. So now I'm out in the world talking about this great thing, all over the world talking about it, because it was so interesting. Data warehouse didn't exist, but it was probably one of the first ones that was out there. And I did a public relations thing with the press and CEOs from all the big companies over in Europe. And when I finished the presentation, we had a cocktail hour, so I got to kind of hobnob with all the CEOs of the big financial institutions from all over Europe, who actually came in to hear just about this thing because it was so new at that time, and we actually got incredible business results out of the changes that we put in. A year later, I am in New York, and I get a call from a headhunter. Jane, I've been retained by this company. They're looking for a CIO. Now, I'm not a CIO at this point. They're looking for a CIO. I said, look, describe to me what the CIO role is, because, that role is not the same every place. In some places, they're making sure the lights come on in the data center every day, and in other places, they're building software and handling solutions. I like the building solutions type of thing and not turning the lights on every day. And not that's not important. It is important, but that's not me. So I'm like, he describes the role, and it was absolutely running the data center. I said, well, what about the software? Well, that comes out of Europe. You just have to implement it. And I said to him, I'd rather stick pins in my eyes. And he said, no, you don't understand. I was specifically told to find you. They don't want anybody else. I had met the CEO when I was over in Europe, and he wanted to hire me for this role. I said, did you hear me? I'd rather stick pins in my eye. I said, look, okay, I really feel bad, but let me think about it, and I'll get back to you with maybe 1 or 2 people who could do this role that I know, who would be really happy to do this role. And, you can tell the person that she recommended this person. So he's like, oh, thank you. I said, well, before I do, could you give me, now I'm making about $125,000 at this time, right? Could you tell me about the range so that when I target somebody, I can kind of make sure I'm not going to insult them or it's the right thing to do? Well, it's a base of about $450,000 plus a bonus of double that. And I was like, oh, God, how can I pull those pins out at this point? But I'll tell you, he did get me my first CIO role at Baker's Trust. The same person. I didn't take the role there because I had befriended him by saying, look, let me recommend somebody else. And so even if you're not interested, take the call. That's the lesson there. Take the call, open the box, look inside before you say no. Maybe it's a good lesson to be learned from that one. And then on the other side of that is, if it's not good for you or it's not what you want to do, recommend 2 people because they will call you back then. And so befriend them. Don't wait for the point in your career where you lost your job. Because when people are in that kind of situation where they lost their job and they're trying to befriend the resume, the headhunters at that point, it's not the time to be building it's building those relationships before, so that they take your call, that they see you, that they know how good you are, that they know that you've helped them, that they know that you'll help them when you get to your next job as well. So that's another one. So I'm open up for all the questions that you guys want to ask. I hope this was of interest to those that want to be.
I just want to stop, before we do go on to the Q&A session, I just want to first off give a great big thank you for this incredible insight. I also want to thank our sponsors. First off is Microsoft Windows 7, which has absolutely nothing to do with the fact that she's formerly the CIO for Microsoft.
And running 7 on my PC.
And running, it's not up there, but it's running. Also, Microsoft Online Business Suite is another sponsor of ours, as well as thank you to Sun Microsystems, as well as the VORC framework and the Avinu content management system. And now I'd like to open the floor up to questions. Yes?
I expect you have the kind of energy level that I can only dream of, but I'm just wondering, how many hours a week on average do you spend being a CIO, even if it's including, reading?
And getting the calls and reading and all of that stuff?
Yeah.
Well, I'm really passionate about this, so I'm a workaholic. I mean, when you find what you love to do, I have to be pulled away. This gift from my husband for Christmas, this was because my office upstairs where my laptop that's larger, and we have a network in our house. I'm usually just too lazy to drag it off the desk and bring it downstairs because it's heavy and it's funky and it's that. So he bought this to me so that in the evening I could still kind of play around with the PC while I'm at home, and sitting watching television with him. With one eye open on the television, trying to like really do something on the PC.
For those who can't
I
see,
work,
it's EPC.
I probably work 80, 90 hours a week. In some way, in some shape or form. Yes.
Just for helping us out, CIO for New York's Department of Finance, how does that relate to the structure of New York? Because in a regular corporation, CEO, CIO, CFO, we know what that is. How does that work with who do you report to?
That's my phone.
That's how we don't
down. The structure is, it's very much the one I want. I have no desire to be a corporate CIO. The corporate CIO typically in organizations is responsible for all the data center and the infrastructure. And it's not that I haven't done that. It's just, it just is not what I'm passionate about. And so I have continually stayed at the divisional level where I'm either working, a CIO role where I'm working with the business, where I get to understand their strategy, where I'm solving problems and kind of driving IT to actually solve business problems, the application development side. So that's what I love. So that's what I do. And in the city, it's the same way. There is, the agency is a big agency. I have a big organization, an IT organization. It's not as big as the infrastructure organization, but it's probably next to the Board of Ed, the second largest IT organization. Yeah.
In today's economy and having, budgetary restraints and having to reprioritize and stuff like that, what do you find is your single most challenging, what is your challenges today? Like, what is the single most biggest challenge that you find for the city today in your department? Besides collecting revenue.
Well, I think the biggest challenge is somewhat self-inflicted, because I probably did not have the foresight for how the economic conditions were going to impact the city when I started 3 years ago. I've been with the city for 3 years. And the interesting thing for me in the first year was I'm doing business cases. This is what I do. Preparing business cases, looking at things, trying to get the funding for things, and laying kind of a strategic roadmap because we were so far behind to try to drive that effort that I talked about, the 5-year plan. And I have a roadmap that's 5 years. Unfortunately, it probably is going to take 8 in the economy to get there. And the self-inflicted is because of expectations that I set, some of the early good work that we did, the fact now that the business wants more and we have less money and less resource to get it done. So some of those things are some of the personal challenges I'm dealing with right now, which is there's a desire. I've created the appetite and now it's more difficult to fulfill. I've also created an absolute, we're all marching in the same way around the vision in the IT organization. They know that we're 21st century, everybody's working on modernization and where we're going and how we're going to bring that up. And that needs to be funded over more years to actually accomplish it. And so just tuning back everyone's expectation, the good news, I'm pretty good at it, because I, have had some time, but it's painful for me. It's personally painful for me because I'm very goal-oriented, and so it's very painful for me to actually tune it back because I want it done in that 5 years. So those are some of the challenges I'm dealing with.
All the way in the back there.
What is your strategy for developing alliances with people in the business? How do you approach that?
Well, I'll tell you where I started. So I've been quite different in governments. And so this is my first foray in government. So, I don't consider myself an expert in this space, and it's a bit different. But there's one thing that I learned really early is in your first 2 months, figure out how they really make money and figure out what the business model is. And this is not a simple thing. And my favorite example is Vanguard Mutual Funds and Fidelity Mutual Funds. They're both in the funds business. They're both banking. You think they're the same industry. Their business models are so different that if you approach them the same way from a technology solutions perspective, you'd be laughed out of one or the other, right? Laughed out of one or the other. One is I'm a low-cost provider. The other is I'm a high-touch, high-service provider. Two different business models. And so the first thing that I did was try to get an understanding. That's the underpinnings, and I even before I interviewing and having discussions, I am reading the investor pages to try to see if I can cull out what their strategy is by the financials that are in the investment pages. Once you do that, you have a foundation to start having a discussion with the business. Once you understand what the real business model is. So building those alliances in the private sector, I find is pretty easy to do because that's what drives them, right? Is their profitability. How do we make money? How can you help me make money? How can you be creative around helping me make money in different ways? In the business, side, that's kind of clear. In the public sector side, it's much more about relationships. It's much more about doing the right thing, right? Doing the right thing, not making a profit, not bringing in the most revenue, but doing the right thing. And so, I'm not saying that in the private sector you don't do the right thing. I'm not saying people are unethical, but doing the right thing plays a part. So, something might not have a great return on investment, but it's the right thing to do, and it's part of government's role to do that. So, that's a little bit different, and it's been a learning experience for me.
So you have been appearing for CIO. So what's the difference between today's CIO with 5 years ago, the CIO in 5 years ago?
Sorry, you have
So the difference between today's CIO with the CIO in 5 years ago.
Sale?
CIO.
Oh, CIO role. Okay. Well, if I look at the role, there are swings. There are swings, and I did a discussion, and I've done some reading even, and there are reports on what's different out there. You are seeing in the marketplace, we're seeing once again the emergence of CIOs reporting to CFOs because those techie people, they can't manage money. They don't know how to manage money. They always overspend. They don't know how much they need. They're building it for whatever. So you're seeing a control that says the CIO needs to report to the CFO because the CFO is going to hold the purse strings and tie the constraints back. We saw the same thing in the last kind of recession at the dot-com. It was worse when the dot-com kind of bubble burst because the CEOs of corporations were driven by Wall Street to the point of having to have a strategy. If you don't have a web strategy in 98, 99, if you didn't have as a corporation and the CEO couldn't articulate that to the shareholders, you were dead in the marketplace. And when that collapsed, it not only collapsed, and for the dot-com industry, for the major corporations who were sitting there, it personally hit their pocketbooks, personally, and what they got in bonuses, and what the impact that it had when that recession hit. And so we saw the same kind of thing during that time, which was this distance of like, put those people in the corner. They sold it up the river, although everybody bought in, so they sold us up the river. And so I think it has to do with the economic times, the difference. I think it is harder. I mean, I really am a love to learn, and as this gentleman said, I have a level of energy that and an appetite for technology and learning, but it's moving so fast. And in fact, where we think things are getting easier, the infrastructure of things are getting harder to support. And even I find that you can blink your eyes for a day and find out that the world changed, and what was right today is wrong tomorrow. And I think of my role, when I think of my role, especially in the city where we make investments and decisions for 10 to 15 years, I'm afraid I don't know what decision is good for 10 to 15 years. I tease that I have a group of software applications right now that I'm responsible in my portfolio. I call them the Dirty 30. Right now there are 50 of them, and it looks like the history of Microsoft. I can pick the year it was built. It is the history of Microsoft, and they haven't changed them out because they made the investment, and they don't get the funding the same way that we would, in the financial services. If you made a mistake 3 years later, you just replaced it. And if Java doesn't happen in government, I have 30, 40-year-old systems that I have responsibility for. Like I said, technology I haven't seen in 15 years. They're there, they're challenges. And so I get really scared as a CIO in government, which is, how do I actually make something that can actually last? That one.
How do you find the talent to keep those old systems running?
That's a real challenge, right? We know what we did in the private sector, don't we? We sent those things to India, and then we sent them to the Philippines, and now we're sending them to China, someplace else in the world. That's what they did in the private sector when you couldn't get the skills any longer. And that's part of the strategy, which is how, 21st century is, how do we actually look to migrate to technologies that is supportable by people coming out of college, where we can hire new people into it, that there are people in the marketplace. I have VSAM systems with assembler. I know that when those last few people retire, I've got a problem, because it's not the kind of thing that government does easy to say, we're going to send it to India because that's where the resources are. And so, that's part of the things that keep me up at night. Those are some of the things I think about from strategy perspective. They're the train going down there at the wall, and you have to deal with it, right? You got to deal with the fact that the train's going to hit, and it will hit. And nobody really wants to hear about that, right? Because things are moving along and it works now, but unfortunately they will die one day, right? Those resources. But it is a struggle, and you need to move to new technologies, and I'm doing that.
All in the back of
I have a two-part question. You mentioned that while working at Prudential, you wanted to be a CEO. And what made you not just venture on that path?
Because I was unhappy every day and missing the CIO role every single day while I was at Microsoft. It wasn't that I didn't like Microsoft, and it wasn't that I wasn't good at my role. I did pretty well at my role. I met my goals. I actually exceeded my goals that the company had set for me. But I personally missed the big picture strategy stuff. I missed having, I love change, and I love learning all different kinds of things besides technology. It's not, I'm the last person you want if you have a well-running shop. If everything is running perfect, you do not want me as a CIO, because I'm not going to be happy, and I'm going to actually probably disrupt a well-running shop just on purpose to actually make something change and different. And so I'm not a good tag repair person. But at Microsoft, it was just, I just found out in that it was my ego speaking to me that I thought I should be a CIO. And that was a lesson I had to learn, right? It was my ego. I let my ego get in front of me that wanted me to be a CEO. I know, by the way, I was at the tables with them, and I'm like, I'm as smart as them, you know? I don't see why not. I'm contributing to these business things, right? So.
What are IT positions from which you feel are a good launch pad to go into a CIO position if I haven't been a CIO before?
Well, that depends on what kind of CIO you want to be. So, if I wanted to
Application
be,
development and web.
okay, so if that were the side there, I would, even if you're a really good application web developer, let's say that's what you do, that you're in development.
Project manager.
You're a project manager, okay, and so you're already on a good path that way. Because I was actually going to say, kind of get the breadth out of as much experience as you can. So you've done the development side, assumably, so that you can at least speak the language a bit and continue to learn on the side where you're going to take your hands out of actually doing it. To project management is where you start getting your foundation for management skills, and even whether the resources directly report to you or whether they're virtually reporting to you, you're going to actually virtually is harder than directly because you have the ability to do the command and control. You'll actually learn a level of influence that's probably really good to learn as well if they're the virtual side. The business analyst side, which is actually working with the business, and sometimes that role, that kind of bridge between the IT people before the engineering design is done, is kind of helping them and tickling out of them what the requirements are, whatever you need to build. Make yourself well-rounded. No, the idea is to be a great generalist, not an expert in any one space.
And convincing somebody that you're ready for the leap if you haven't done it before.
And that's why I say time box.
Time box.
Time box. If you can't get it in the, God, somebody will hit me for this. If you can't get it in the company or the organization you're with now, start thinking about it. Don't start networking. Start talking to people. Figure out how to find a job where you can get the experience that you want. If you really think that's what's needed. And the other thing I would recommend is talk to as many CIOs. I'm only one. I've sat on panels with lots of CIOs, and we've all come different paths getting there. So it's not like there's a recipe book. Mm-hmm. Yes, that's why I'm kind of being general, because it is general. There's not like there's necessarily a recipe book there. And not every company wants the same CIO kind of model either, right? Like I said, call me if you want a change agent who's going to drive change. Don't call me if you have a well-running shop and you want to maintain a repair person. You want to keep it on this kind of deal. So all of those type of things you've got to take into consideration as to what do you want. But
What is your favorite publications and websites?
well, it's interesting today because I'm almost beginning to hate everything because I feel so overwhelmed with all things. I have a stack of publications that I'm telling you, I keep thinking I will get to them and read them on the publication side, and I typically am not at getting them, and they sit there and I give them away to people in my organization more. But I do. I love The Economist because I also have a passion for business and understanding those business models for me. That's one side. From a technology perspective, I tend more to look at sites, not even the sites, because I have people who actually will pull stuff for me if I need it now on the sites. At Gartner, I use them. Use them not because I don't think they're the greatest analysts in the world. They're good. They're good. It's because it's there and available, and I can use them, and they're respected, and you can use them as backup for selling concepts, right? All you have to do is, if your idea is good and it's in their magic quadrant, well, look, Gartner says it's that way, right? So it actually becomes a selling tool for me. I go out to lots of sites. I can't tell you my favorite. Some of my favorite and my most fun sites that have to do with my personal life and not my business life, but I'm literally overwhelmed by the amount of links and things that I see and the amount of vendors that call me and want to see me on any given day. And, in some ways I look at myself and I say, oh my God, you're your own worst enemy. You helped create this, and it's overwhelming. Your life is a 7x24 just trying to stay up with the amount of information. So I fall into the overload. I can't tell you the best because it's a random event these days. I used to read a book every day on the train. I can't even read books anymore because it's coming at me faster than I would like. That's the honest to God truth. Because I don't have the patience to do it.
Yes.
Any advice on?
Oh, there's only also, I have to tell you, I get about somewhere between 900 and 1,000 and 100 emails a day. So, yeah.
Any advice on selling a large project to executive leadership who don't understand technology? They do have a need, but they like everything to be brief with an explanation.
Well, see, I wouldn't spend a second, you know, the interesting thing, what was my role when I was at Microsoft and I was driving that side? I went around the globe, I talked, you know, most of the thing was being out there kind of doing the PR thing. I traveled, I lived on an airplane, and I talked to the CEOs of the world's largest corporations. And I'd have meetings, and with my title, I had no problem getting in these meetings, and I would sit in and talk to them about technology strategy and never mention a piece of technology. Talk about case studies. So in that case, if you've got something that you think that the business really needs, you should be talking to them about what the value is they're going to get from it, not what the technology is that they need to invest in. And that would be my advice. So what is it going to do for them as a business? Talk to them about that. They don't care what the technology is that you get it done. They just want the result that the implementation is going to get. And if you can articulate that up against the value with the expense side, if it's a positive type of thing, we'll get approved, right? You can say, look, if you give me $500,000 to do this project, I'm telling you we will actually increase the amount of penetration in this market space by 2%, and we can do that. That means X, Y, Z, and if it returns, you know, $2 million in a year, they'll happily hand you $500,000 to get a project done. So that would be my advice to you. Stop talking about the technology. Talk about the solution and talk about the business value that it will create. You'll get the money that way. At least I think. You know, not 100% of the time, but you know. Yeah.
In the blue shirt over there. Yeah.
Me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So to be successful, it's important to have mentors in life. And I wonder if you could say a couple of words about the mentoring that you've had along your career. And
Okay.
did they find you? Did you find them? And if you will also say a couple of words about whatever executive development they have had out for you to take advantage of.
I've had both because I worked for really big companies, but I've had some really great mentors in my career. When I took my first line position in Chase Manhattan Bank, the individual who was the CIO at the time was a great person. And he taught me the lesson that I hope I kind of departed on you today. Don't hire everybody who looks like you. He stopped me one day. He said, Jane, you and Mel fight like cats and dogs, and you don't understand. And I said, what? He said, you don't understand because if I would have come out on the floor and said, Jane, Mel, you guys got to get to California as fast as you can. Jane, you would have sold 12 people on the floor. They'd be running down to the car. Everybody would be excited. They'd be in the car. And you would have no idea except for go west. Mel, on the other hand, would go downstairs. He would buy a map. You'd be halfway across the country, and he'd be plotting the shortest route to the Thorns Neck Bridge. And at the end of the day, 3 weeks later, you would have weaved down to Mexico, up to Canada. When you hit the borders, you know, of those places, they would say, no, California, you're not going west anymore. And you would get there in 3 weeks. Mel would also get there in 3 weeks, but he would have left 2.5 weeks after you because he would have had the perfect plan to get there. He would have known exactly, right? So he said, he taught me the lesson of you need all kinds of people around you. And it's not just about having that energy thing. So from a management perspective, he taught me a great lesson there. And at the same place, I had someone who worked for me in IT, who every time I, you know, in my organization, taught me. He was not a mentor, but he really was a mentor. He was a friend. Because I was young. And I didn't know about managing, but you know, you're there and you're doing it. And I thought every time I asked this person a question, I thought they were easy questions I'm asking, and I would not get a response, and I thought he was being insubordinate. I really did. And the truth was, he was an introvert. And he was such an introvert, he had to think of every single ramification of a response that he might give me before he gave it to me. I, on the other hand, am an extrovert, and I can talk myself out of a good idea in the middle of a conversation. Because I hear my own words, and I'm like, oh my God, did I just say that? That's not right, you know? And that's my style. And so he came in one day, and he gave me the Myers-Briggs for Quadrants of the Brain. I said, you need to read this. And he was right. I did need to read it. I needed to understand how other people think. And he taught me that if at first when you approach somebody with an idea and a thought, and their hair starts standing up on the back of their neck and they don't like what you're saying, come in from the left. Take a different approach. No, and if the left doesn't work, come in from the right with a different approach. And if that doesn't work, come in from another side. So he taught me the lessons by handing me that book that, you know, people process information differently, and you have to actually talk to people in a way that they can understand what you're saying. So that was an important lesson. I would mentor my mentor still today, and you know, when I thought I wanted to be a CIO, was the CEO of Prudential. She was my boss. She was a mentor. We are good friends. I've helped her in ways. She actually left Prudential. She started a software business. And I actually helped her develop her business model for her software business. And we still talk, but she's helped me in ways in dealing with, you know, senior executives and kind of getting that right. So those are the three, you know, major kind of things that kind of pop at us learning ones. For me, on the other side, I love mentoring. I've mentored people. I have someone who works for me I hired right out of college when I worked for Chase and on a first project, who came back and took a job in the city and took a $40,000 pay cut to come back and have fun and play from where he works, and to be my CTO. And so, you know, the payback is always great, right? Because he can afford to do it now too. You know, it's come full circle on that side.
Well, just sort of to tag along with what you just said, what if you are sort of unsuccessful in coming from the left and from the right, and there's still a conflict?
You know,
So how would you approach this? What are your favorite tools, I would say?
well, you know, again, I would look at that depending on who the person is. You know, if this is your boss and there is still always conflict, time back to your experience and maybe learn from that experience, but find someplace else where you're not in an everyday being in that kind of a situation. That would be my recommendation on something where it's a boss situation. Because quite frankly, as good as I am, there is one specific type of personality type that I just have difficulty, and no matter how hard I try, I just cannot, you know, make it work. I've encountered that, and sometimes you just have to distance yourself, and sometimes you just have to find somebody else to deliver the message, because it could be just such ends of the spectrums in personality that you can't even hear the same thing when you're trying to speak. I don't know if that answers your question, but
It certainly does, to some extent, and to the other extent that I think nothing can be done, sort of. And I'm just thinking, like, what technique-wise, you know, maybe, you know, like constructive confrontation, maybe whatever what you think. What would you
well,
use?
first of all is, you know, develop a skill of reading body language. I mean, if you develop that skill, if you've developed the skill of reading body language, and I find that most often that people think that they're even trying a different way, but they don't even notice that. When I said the person's hair is starting to stand up on the back of their neck, you are not getting the message. In fact, they're getting angry, and when they start getting angry, they can't even hear you. Right? That's a known fact. They can't hear you as soon as they start getting angry. So you've got to take a different approach. And if you become a learned student of body language, I hate having phone conversations. Hate them. I'm the shortest person you ever had on the phone because I cannot read what you're thinking. And I can't read if you're that hair is starting to get up on the back. Are you making faces? Are you uncomfortable? Do you not know what I'm saying anymore? I hate it. Because I can't see all of those signs that would tell me, back off, take a different approach, be a little softer, ask them if they're with you, you know, all of those type of things that you would do. So I would start there, to say, be a good listener too. That's hard for me, I can tell you. I need sometimes people to kick me under the table. But be a good listener is also an important thing, because they're going to usually kind of give you the hints of what their issue is. And if you would listen, then you might be able to actually think of a strategy for coming back and addressing it.
What do you think the difference is between this, between a CTO and a CIO? And I'm sure it varies, but generally, what would you say would be the difference?
Well, it depends on where you have it, right? So, if you take it at the very high corporate level, it's usually one is more focused on the business strategy and kind of like laying vision and strategy, and the other is more involved in the day-to-day infrastructure side. In my particular case, my CTO is, because I'm in the application space, he is much more involved in what I would call, kind of standards building the really good understanding so he can absolutely talk at the technical level. I can't do that anymore. You guys start asking me about SQL anymore, and you'll run me out of the room. So I need someone who can actually go to the depths so that they can communicate way down at the technical level to make sure that we're on the right path. Because I do recognize, I used to use techniques in the early days. We talked about that, that first massively parallel that we put out there, and I built a team, and at that time I didn't know how to roll my sleeves up and work. But I used to tell my database, and databases were pretty even new at that time, right? I would walk around my organization. That organization was used to using flat files, vSAM files, that kind of stuff, right? And I would walk around with threatening. I want a perfectly normalized database. Don't you dare deviate. Now, I knew that was impossible. I wanted them to secretly only denormalize it where it made performance. If I had let them off the hook and didn't give them the guidance where they think they were sneaking behind my back only to make performance tuning things, we wouldn't have even had a relational database model. They would have probably put something that looked like vSAM in, and that's what we would be trying to run, in the environment. So some of the things are just kind of like the fun tactics. You need people like that who can kind of dive to the ground. As great as technology, as changing it as good as I could think I am at interviewing people, or that my managers are interviewing people, or my project manager can interview people, someone's got to be able to look down and do reviews and say, are they at least going on the right path, or do we need to pat them back a bit? So that's what I see as the difference, at least in my organization.
Almost every day we are hearing stories about the government, cities, states switching their platforms or migrating their data to the open source platform from all over the world.
Yes.
Like Germany is switching
Yes.
to open source stuff, South Africa is switching to open source stuff. So what is your vision on that subject for New York City?
What was the question? He wants to know what we're doing with open source. And, open source is funny. So I didn't have an opportunity. I'm looking at moving, to Linux. It is a slow move for the city. It's a challenge, but I'm used to that. I mean, I put Unix in Chase Manhattan Bank when nobody knew how to spell that. So I'm used to doing that kind of thing and pushing for those ideas. I'm not quite, the reality around the world with open source governments is more driven not by the economy, not by the pieces, their desire to not have the U.S. control them. Coming out of, this is from my Microsoft days, this is reality, like the standards in open source and the work that they do were so that Microsoft wouldn't take over, so that SAP could actually have a ground and the standards and things were driving. And so the government actually has supported open source because the alternative is all US-based companies putting out, the big stuff that enterprises are putting in, not small places, but the big stuff that enterprises are putting in. I think, though, because of the economic conditions, there's a real chance that the U.S. will actually adopt more and more. You don't see a lot of open source being used in the United States yet. That's not that, so pushing it is, but there is a reality that, you've got to change. I can tell you in the city of New York, we do have a partnership with the CUNY system, which is part of the city, to actually have laboratories so that we can test open source code before we bring it in.
As far as I know, NESA and some, the national laboratories are using open source high computing platforms, and NYC is one of the few institutions in the States uses
The high
MySQL.
computing platforms, I mean, you can
No, what
buy
I'm-
good
what I'm
stuff
trying to say is that
from
not
any
just-
vendor on that space, right? I mean, so that's a natural place to go. It's kind of,
So even in the US, some institutions are still using open source without the
Well, I can tell you
Microsoft.
in 1982, we took our tax system that was written in COBOL and we put it out into the community. It's open source and 12 other states picked it up and used it. So the concept of software built in that's free actually happens. But true open source, as you think of it today, that's out there, web services, bringing that in, I do not see it going wildly fast yet in the US. And I do spend time in government discussions as opposed to what's going on in Europe. But I know the drivers there were about the European kind of place really was worse than the U.S. was in trying to kill Microsoft, and their penetration. And clearly, when you go to the other parts of the world, when you go to India or you go to China, which are, they're kind of like the driving force of even starting a lot of open source work, was driven because the U.S. models are upside down for emerging countries. Think about the IBM model, think about the Sun model, think about the Microsoft model. Hardware and software are cheap, people are expensive. That's what sells in the U.S. That's what allowed them to create big markets in the countries that were mature marketplaces, because we as technologists cost a lot of money. And so they did everything they could to make us more productive, build tools to help us be productive, to have things that had people who were in IT to be productive. You go to China or India, hardware and software are expensive. Not they cost more than here, they're expensive compared to people. And so the model is tipsy-turvy. And I was the executive sponsor for China when I was with Microsoft. I spent a lot of time over there. You would go to a bank and they would have 286 processors, machines still today, because they kind of invest like governments invest. It is government. Their business was government. They make 20, 30-year investments. And you talk about moving 150,000 workstations at a time to a new upgrade. They didn't have the money. So it was easier to actually drive that way. So I think it's natural economics as they're kind of growing. These countries are growing. There's an opportunity. But it's still, hardware and software are expensive compared to where they are. And it's a struggle for the people who have made money. So we're going there in the city. We're just not quite going quite as fast, I think, as some other parts of the world. Yeah.
As someone who meets with vendors and oversees implementations, can you tell me a little bit about trials and tribulations of accurately predicting the time, money, man hours, and resources necessary to complete an implementation?
It depends on what it is, and I actually think it's part of the learning side, but I am also, not that I'm great at it, I am a true believer of putting processes in place and disciplines in place. Because I believe the tools of project management and process management and a good SDLC, what they do is they actually take the guessing out of where did you fail in your estimating over time. Without it, most project managers have no idea how they fell behind, why they fell behind, when they fell behind, until it's way too late and they can't even see the forest and the tree because it was 45 things. But that loop makes people better and better. Having used that discipline in my early career, I don't know how you get it. It's kind of intuitive. I can almost go like this at this point and be within 10% of what it might cost and how long it might take in an environment. If it's something that's known, if it's something that's totally new and wild and out there, and those things only happen about every 10 years where you see something that's like, oh my God, this is going to change the universe and the world, right? I don't know, how you do it, but all I would say is have some process. It's really hard. I'm struggling right now, so I'm putting process in place here. I've done it before, process in place. and I have half the camp. We're doing Agile. You're trying to put too much. I'm like, no. You're not doing Agile. You're doing chaos. You can't even give me the definition of Agile. All you think is if you use Agile or Extreme is you don't have to have any process, right? And I'm saying you just need a feedback loop, right? It is not good enough to run in chaos, because then you absolutely have no predictability. And that really makes the business mad after a while. I don't know how you get great at it. Just make sure you have some plans and then track to those things, and then when you get your hand on the fire, it usually puts it into your memory. Oh God, testing does not take 2 days, it takes 3 weeks. Buying and getting the hardware installed doesn't take 2 days, it takes 3 months, you know. I've had to learn some new things in my measurement, you know, since I joined the city, because their time frames take long to acquire things. My first project, I put a 3-month plan in part. They told me it was, and I was there maybe 3 weeks, and they said, you know, you're so new, we're going to fast path this stuff here. But fast path this, so I'm thinking, like, I know it's government's going to be slower, but if I was the CIO in the private side, fast path would have meant that it would have been set up the next day. So I'm giving it like 2 to 3 weeks in my plan to get set up. It arrived the day before we had to go live. And in the way, and you talk about someone who doesn't like roadblocks and gets involved, I did get involved, because my team, I'm like, how things going? Well, we stopped. What do you mean you stopped? We have no hardware. Well, you got a vendor, they've got an office, they've got hardware, go! You know, and I called up the vendor, and they did all the development on the vendor site. And we were able to actually implement on time. But I had to learn a whole bunch of things that were normal in my timing that were not normal that I had to deal with here. You know, so there's no magic recipe, but get feedback. Once I got burnt on that, believe me, I knew I wasn't fast path did not mean tomorrow. And God knows what it would happen when it wasn't fast path. I just needed to find out what the process was. So I did that. I did that learning on my own.
Last question of the night. Okay.
I just had a question about, with the new release of all these data sets and the transparency that the city is trying to now create, which I think is just is long overdue, and I'm sure you feel the same way.
Did you play in a contest?
I actually did.
Oh, good.
I actually did.
Did you some of my did?
No, I don't know what I used. I can't tell what I used. So, but I just wanted to kind of get your take on that. And I have to say, and maybe on behalf of everybody, that, you know, first of all, your energy is refreshing, number one. Being in city government, you know, some people, or any type of government, people might get the stereotypical.
That's what you really came to see.
You know, they might get the stereotypical, you know, persona of, you know, it's all bureaucratic and it's all everything. And just sitting here listening to you is absolutely refreshing. And hearing you say that how you're really pushing people to be their best is something that I think we all should absolutely applaud. That said,
when's the next set of data coming out? Because I want something new.
No, I just, you know, maybe just hearing your think now that the contest is over.
I thought the contest was great. I mean, I asked if you use some of our data, but because I think of the data sets that were made available, we probably supplied 25% of them. Now, they didn't get used by everything because the stuff that I do is not all that fun and exciting, but there were a lot of modeling done by individuals out there looking at the data. I thought it was a fantastic idea. I'm hoping that, you know, some great ideas could actually help us along, right? We love brilliant ideas that come from both the outside and the inside. And so, you know, when you talked about open source, what we consider open source, that is kind of like the idea of open source, hoping that we'll get something that's a product that's good, that you could use, that we could, you know, make something great with, and still encourage and get great thinking out of the individuals. I only wish I came up with the idea. I didn't. But I did participate fully, and we actually gave as much as we could. I'm also very lucky. The reason that we gave so much information is that almost everything that we have is public domain. Now, what I can tell you is almost all the data we gave, it was a very difficult thing for us to do, because it came from systems that are vSAN systems. I had DB2 that run like vSAN systems, you know, because they didn't have people who knew how to architect. So they come from some of the ugliest, oldest systems there are. But some of the transparency and the awareness is something that I struggle every day to deliver internally. So having, people think on the outside is great, and the tools and, clear. I want to see people mesh our data with, Google Maps. Right? And other things. So I don't care how we get there, as long as we do good things, because it's about doing the right thing. So, great question.
Well, I want to first off thank Jane.
I have one. I hope you
I want to thank you all for coming, and I hope to see you all soon. Jane, are you able to spend the time if anyone wants to come up now?
Yeah, I
She
can
will
spend a
be
few more
here
minutes.
for
I
one-on-one.
gotta take this down.
She'll be here one-on-one, and I look